Your job isn't to entertain or impress. Your job is to engage with yourself, with the story, with the emotional core that called you to write it in the first place. So write the story you need to tell. That's how the story will find the people who need to read it. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. There is a lot of writing advice floating around out there. Some of it's helpful, some of it not so much, and a lot of it gets handed down like gospel, oversimplified rules or recycled advice that doesn't consider where you are in your writing process, where you are in your writing journey. And what happens when you internalize that advice, especially too early, is that it can lead to hesitation or self-doubt or that nagging feeling that you're not doing it right. In today's episode, we're going to bust 3 common writing myths that might be slowing you down, shaking your confidence, or keeping you stuck. I'll give you something more balanced, more complete, and more affirming to replace them so you can feel more confident in how you approach your writing. So let's get right to it. Myth number 1, you have to have your story all figured out before you start writing. The truth is, you don't need a complete roadmap or template. You just need a direction. This myth pressures writers to overplan, or worse, to delay writing until they have the perfect outline. But here's the thing. Writing is discovery. What you think your story is about on page 1 might completely change by chapter 4. That doesn't mean you made a mistake. It's just a sign that your story is alive. It's a living, breathing thing. So instead of mapping out every twist and turn, start with what you're pulled toward: a voice, a character, a moment, a dynamic that intrigues you. Follow that thread. All you really need to begin is one idea, one thread that pulls you into the world of the story. It could be a character, it could be a moment, it could be a dynamic, a line of dialogue, something that sparks a question in you. And from there, you just follow that thread to the next idea and the next idea and the next. Trying to write from some preconceived formula may give you a sense of safety and control, but it won't necessarily lead to a story that moves anyone. And honestly, outlines alone are no guarantee of quality. Which brings us to this question. What is quality? It's easy to assume that quality means technical excellence, clean prose, perfect pacing, mastery of structure. But I've read stories that check all those boxes and still leave me cold, because quality isn't just about craft. You can have polished sentences, but still have a story that doesn't work. It's not about whether a story is good or bad in some objective sense. It's about connection, resonance, a story that feels alive, that reaches in and touches something real. Craft matters, absolutely. Structure matters, but it's your engagement, your curiosity, your willingness to discover that gives the story its soul. So you don't have to know everything before you begin. In fact, You shouldn't. Your job isn't to predict the story, it's to follow it. So start where the energy is. Follow your curiosity, follow the sparks. Let the story unfold one step at a time. And trust that quality and structure will come, not just from craft, but from meaning and momentum. That doesn't mean structure doesn't matter. It does. In fact, structure can guide your intuition and help you make sense of what you're discovering. In my 3-act story course, opening again this September, we explore foundational structure, not to box you in, but to help you think your way through your story as you write it, as your story unfolds. So you don't have to predict the whole story. You just have to listen for it. Don't get stuck trying to figure it all out. Instead, stay curious, stay connected, stay open. Let the story show you what it wants to be. Okay, on to myth number 2. Plot is the first thing to develop. The truth is, you want to start with the main story problem, not the plot. But first, what is plot and what is story? They're not the same thing. Plot is often taught as a sequence of events, but events by themselves don't make the story. The events need to be infused with meaning, and that meaning comes from your character's inner problem, what they want, what they fear, what they believe. What they want, what they fear, and what they believe. Once you know what's at stake for your character internally, you can start creating the external dilemmas that challenge that. Said another way, plot is what happens, structure is how you tell it, the order in which you lay that across the page, and story is why it matters. So plot is the surface layer, structure is the delivery system, but the story, that heartbeat beneath it all, is the transformation your character undergoes. For example, a plot would be a woman travels cross country to confront her estranged sister. The story is she learns to release the guilt she's been carrying since childhood. So don't get stuck trying to invent what happens next. Start by asking, what is my character struggling with? What's unresolved? Then let the plot grow out of that. The plot then becomes what the screenwriter Peter Dunn calls emotional footprints. Your story is moving towards some crystallized truth, and the plot is the road it takes to get there. So don't obsess too much about plot until you figure out what's driving your character beneath the surface, what they want, what they're afraid of, what they believe about themselves or the world. That's the engine. Plot is just the track it runs on. Once you know the problem your character is grappling with, the tension inside them, you can start building the external events that challenge, pressure, and ultimately transform them. That's when the plot starts to feel earned, organic, alive. So let plot grow out of the emotional terrain of your character. That's how you create momentum that feels inevitable, not manufactured. The real story starts from the inside out. For example, in the novel Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, on the surface, the plot, it's about a girl growing up isolated in the marsh, a murder investigation, and a love triangle. But what drives the story, what gives it its power, is Kaya's deep internal problem, abandonment. Her core wound is that everyone she's ever loved has left her. That belief that she's unlovable, that she's not fit for the world, shapes every decision she makes. Once you understand that, the plot makes sense. The events aren't random. They're a direct outgrowth of her inner world. Each external dilemma, being taken advantage of, being accused, falling in love, is a mirror for the emotional terrain she's navigating. And that's what makes this story feel so cohesive, so resonant. The plot isn't just stuff happening, it's pressure being applied to her deepest belief. So again, don't rush to build plot before you understand your main character's problem. Because when the internal arc leads the way, the plot will follow, and it will feel like the only story that could have been told. Okay, last one, myth number 3. You have to write with your audience in mind. My advice to this is don't serve the audience first, serve the story. Your first allegiance and responsibility is to the story, not the audience. Writing with an audience in mind too early can dilute your voice, compromise your vision, and cause a lot of self-doubt. Yes, revision is where audience awareness comes in, but during the drafting stage, stay true to your emotional compass, what you're trying to discover through this piece of writing. This is one of the most common pieces of advice tossed around, especially in publishing or marketing circles. Know your audience, write for your reader. And yes, audience awareness has its place, but not now. Trying to write for an audience too early can actually pull you away from the story you're meant to tell. It can lead to second guessing every choice, diluting your voice to fit an imaginary expectation, editing yourself before the words even hit the page. It can also trap you in performance mode, where you're no longer writing to discover, but to impress. And that shuts down the most essential part of your creative process, your emotional connection to your material. In the early stages, your only job is to stay tethered to your own emotional compass. What are you trying to work out through this story? What questions are you exploring? What truth are you reaching for, even if you don't fully understand it yet? Because that's what gives your story its life. It's what makes it true. Not true in a factual sense, but emotionally true. And when a story is emotionally true, it resonates. That's how it finds its readers. Not because it was perfectly tailored to an audience from the start, but because it was deeply felt and courageously told. So take ownership of your story right from the inside out. Don't worry if it's marketable or relatable in the first draft. Your job isn't to entertain or impress. Your job is to engage with yourself, with the story, with the emotional core that called you to write it in the first place. So write the story you need to tell. That's how the story will find the people who need to read it. It's your engagement with your work that is the only barometer you need to write a great story. So write the story you need to tell. Your readers will find you. So if you've been carrying any of these myths and misconceptions, maybe without even realizing it, this is your invitation to set them down. Number 1, you don't need your whole story figured out before you start. Number 2, you don't have to force a plot before you understand your character's inner world. And number 3, you definitely don't need to write for an audience before you've written something that feels true to you. Writing a story isn't about getting it right from the start. It's about discovery, curiosity, deepening your connection to the story you're trying to tell. And when you let go of rigid rules and lean into your own process, your own instincts, you open the door to something more meaningful, more alive, right on the page. So let this be your permission to write your way, to follow what ignites your curiosity, to trust your own rhythm, to let the story reveal itself in its own time. Every story has its own gestation period, and you never know how long that gestation period will be. My hope is that by replacing rigid rules with something more spacious, you'll feel freer, more grounded, and more in relationship with your story. Not trying to control it, but collaborating with it, listening for what wants to emerge. Because writing isn't about doing it right, making it perfect, or to fit a certain genre or blueprint. It's about making something real, something only you can tell. And that starts by letting go of the myths and leaning into your own voice, leaning into your own instincts. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.